You're the leader of your ship, as I call it. That's basically what leadership means, lead your ship. So what are you doing about it to take ownership of it? It is another way of saying it, own your ship. You can put out the blame there, you know, you can put all kinds of fingers out, well, it was my circumstance, it was the government, it was whatever. This could be partly true, but you're still responsible for your actions and behavior, how you think. No one else is. We all have this universal need. We want to be loved. We want to be seen. We want to feel accepted. We want to feel understood. First of all is we don't know really how to listen. And the second bit, we don't know how to have empathy. You have to dial down your own assumptions, your own opinions, your own preconceived ideas, and really listen to another person, to their story.
Welcome to Knowing Who You Are. Today we have a coach, a mentor from the Netherlands, but currently based in London. But he's also a speaker. He's been helping out people and also professionals and people in different sectors to find them and help to find these people the right mindset and the right conditions to become successful. So Marco, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. But first of all, when I had given the introduction, I wanted to stop in the middle and suddenly ask you the question. When you talk about help people find the right condition to be successful, what's your definition of success?
Well, that is a good question because success is defined by that is very personal.
Yeah.
I think success can mean different things for different people. If you ask me what I see as success, that to me would mean that is translated in my purpose, and that is to help people to be successful in their leadership capacity, that meaning that they have a positive impact, that they are able to love deeply, not only with their loved ones, but also with friends, etc., and also live a more fulfilled life, whatever that may mean for them. That most of the time that has to do with their vocation, their talents, their interests, and as a consequence, leave a better legacy. Well, if I had been able to help them on their way, that to me would feel like success.
Because why I'm asking this question, first of all, from my experience, I don't know about yours because we are from different cultures. Yeah. But in the South Asian community, it's a thing that this idea of success is somehow related to, there is a financial connection to it too. Like financially, how successful you are, what job you're doing. And in certain countries, in South Asia, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, or even in Bangladesh, my country, there's a thing in terms of success. It's like when you are a big doctor, you were a lawyer, because I studied law. I practiced as a lawyer as well for a while. Yeah. I mean, following the same trend, I didn't know what to do at the time. So then you are a success because in the society, someone can say, oh, you're a doctor, you're a lawyer. Because there was a time in my life when I was practicing in London, but at the same time, I used to do a lot of performance as a musician. So there had been times when I would go to certain performance as a musician, but the promoter who's introducing me to other people, oh, Ershad is a lawyer. But I was thinking, okay, is this my identity? Because I remember going to the restroom during the break and I was looking at myself in the mirror. I said, where am I? Am I happy to be in this place performing? Do I like this? Because I questioned myself. There's people who are literally identifying you and somehow connecting your identity to a certain profession. Yeah, it's not healthy, I found. So as you said, your idea of success, it's definitely generic and not generic, and it's different for different people. There's one question when you said about leadership. Yeah. So say, for example, in a relationship context between two partners, husband and wife, whatever that is. Yeah. how the leadership work, and how would you say that, and how would you put your experience in practice?
Well, if in that context, if you talk about partners, then I would say I would call it then self-leadership. And that means each individual has to take self-leadership very seriously, because the lack thereof has an impact not only on themselves, but also in this case with the partner. Right. So to make this practical or relatable, if somebody has an addiction, right, whether that's alcohol, whether that's could be anything, it doesn't can be substance, but can also be a certain behavior. So self-leadership means you are the leader of your ship, as I call it. That's basically what leadership means, lead your ship. So what are you doing about it to take ownership of it? It is another way of saying it, own your ship. And I say sometimes in a fun way, because I love inspiration of movies, you know, who is going to walk the plank? Because you have allowed powers to come on board to dictate your life. Because let's be honest, what masters you has control over you. There can be no two captains on the ship. So if your addiction is more powerful than you, then you're not in leadership of your life.
Yeah.
So so you have to take leadership back. So that then the question then is, okay, so what are you doing to take ownership of that? And sometimes people, well, the majority of people need help. And it's there where they have to have the willingness and the acknowledgement by saying, you know what, I can't do this on my own. I need to seek help in order to overcome this. This to me is already a sign of self-leadership. But the problem is, if people don't do that, so, and I don't mean it in any way disrespectful, but if somebody, for example, with an alcohol problem is not taking ownership of their alcohol problem, then it not only affects them themselves, it also affects the people they are surrounded by, and of course, the loved ones.
Exactly.
And I've heard too many stories, you know, where either the father or the mother had a volatile relationship because of an alcohol problem. And children who grow up in that, it's well, in most cases, it's traumatic. Now, it's not about pointing fingers, but at the same time, I think, you know, that's why I emphasize when people work with me, is that, okay, what's your first act of self-leadership? Because you can put out the blame there. You know, you can put all kinds of fingers out. Well, it was my circumstance, it was the government, it was whatever. Which can be partly true, but you're still responsible for your actions and behavior, how you think. No one else is.
Exactly. Some people end up just trying to shift the blame. They say that I'm the victim of, and they victimize themselves. Yeah. So say, for example, in a relationship, there's partners and they're both working on it, supposed to work on themselves.
Yeah.
But they have a very loving relationship. Yeah. But one of them failed to do that.
Yes.
So what would you say for the other person to do? I mean, how would they cope? Because they love each other, they want to be together, but one person is failing.
Yes.
And how would you think the other person should react to the situation?
Well, I have been in a situation, a client hired me, wanted to reconcile with his partner. And in this case, it was a male, and he was really keen to seek help. But it was basically his female partner who basically said, well, you have to change, not me. And so he was a bit like, well, how am I going to deal with this? Because, you know,
without any support.
Yeah. And said, well, let's work on you. Let's work on you about your dynamic, because there are certain reactions that you have in your behavior that is causing triggers. So if we work on that, that will already change the game. You see, in any relationship, there are patterns and behavior, right?
Yeah.
And they'll have become habitual, and there's not always negative. It's sometimes just how life is. But if we change slightly something in that dynamic, that automatically has a consequence for the partner as well. Is that making sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's about the response.
It's a non-response. So we started work on him. So he, in a way, stop responding, normally for example, being angry, and then realized, well, I don't have to be angry. So he remained calm, which of course created a reaction in his partner, because the partner was so used to that he became angry, and now he's not getting angry. So which forced a response in her, and that made her reflect, okay, I need to change my dance.
Yeah.
You see, and in that scenario, the relationship got reconciled. So ideally, of course, I would say I work with couples. Ideally, that both couples are in it, because that is the ideal, you know.
Exactly.
But if one is not willing for whatever reason, not all hope is lost. If one person is willing to work on the issues, that change in dynamic can have an effect. But I also know, let's be real, that there are situations that one person just doesn't, just basically refuses, and that creates a deadlock.
One thing is refusing. Another thing is that in the interim period, when the other person is trying to work on themselves, it's difficult on the person who's waiting for this person to change. So there could be make or break situation when they would feel that, okay, I cannot handle it anymore, because they have to think about their mental fitness too, or their mental health, we call it, but it's overall fitness, the mental fitness, I say, where it comes the well-being. So what's the point when you think that a person has to make a decision for themselves, thinking that, okay, I have to now rescue myself?
Yes. Well, I think I want to add on that. You know, I take a very different approach when there is, for example, safety concerns, whether that's physical abuse or emotional abuse, because people are quite clearly about physical abuse, because that seems to be, you know, that's visible. But emotional abuse is as damaging, or if I not even think even more, because of its nature. And then, of course, in those scenarios, of course, you need to take safety firsthand. If by all means get out physically, if there's no other option, because then I even, you know, get the police involved if there is that
No,
kind
definitely.
of danger.
But what if the person who's working on himself or themselves or herself, it's going through some kind of depression, that they're weak, they cannot handle, rather than being aggressive, they're literally going through a troubled mindset themselves. So that person is constantly trying to parent this person, like looking after this person and trying to tell, no, trust me, you are strong enough and you can get through this, but they're not working.
Okay, you mentioned parenting. You're not supposed to parent each other. That's not healthy in a relationship.
Exactly.
Okay, so if you start to, and I see that sadly happening in relationship dynamic, one becomes the parent, or the coach or the therapist or the counselor or the rescuer or the fixer. And when that happens, that creates a codependent relationship, because one person still doesn't take ownership, because this is the key. So
that's why I use the word, because I have seen that, and that's what people suffer from. And most of the time, unfortunately, no offense to the male members of the audience, but most of the time I heard this coming over and over from the woman in the relationship. They talk about it, that I was tired of just being the mother all the time.
I can jump on that, because that's the reality. And that's also my message to a lot of male, not to generalize, but I think I can give you a classic example, which is tends to be a pattern. A woman had a conversation with me, went through a divorce, because after 30 years plus of marriage, she couldn't cope with it anymore. Her partner, in this case the man, had a sex addiction, and she was giving till she was basically depleted. And so when we had a conversation with me, her and me, what came out basically, she didn't know who she was.
So it was more between them. It's not that he's going outside and seeing other women.
He has an issue. He has an issue, right? But she's being the caring, the giving, and I stick out with you. But that is not healthy. But what you then create, what you then get is she's so depleted that she gives herself so endlessly in the process, which to me is already a big warning sign, a red flag. And as an end result, she didn't know who she was. She said to me, Marco, I don't know who I am. I have to figure out who I am. I said, well, we can work on that. But that means she was now in the 60s, rediscovering who you are, who you are really as a person, or in her case as a woman. That's that feels quite intense, quite overwhelming. And the sad story is, you know, if he would have taken ownership and said, you know what, I have an alcohol problem, I go through therapy, I do whatever it takes because I love you so much, but I don't want to damage you anymore. I seek the help because I want to come into a better place. It's not, in this case, the woman's responsibility to fix him. It's his responsibility. He has to take ownership.
Yeah.
You see, and of course you can support. I'm not saying, well, you know, but support has to have a boundary.
Mm.
You know, I love you so much, you can do better than this, so what are you going to do about it?
It's not only about support. I mean, boundaries should be there in any kind of relationship. I
Yeah,
think that's
healthy boundaries. Yeah, yeah.
healthy boundaries. Like even if it's your work colleague, even if it's your relationship with your employer, it's not only relationship, everywhere, even with your friends. So
It's boundaries is a big topic. You know, I'm reading a book at the moment, which is really a good one. It's basically for leaders, you know, and one of the things is that, and I see that played out as well, leaders who do not know how to set boundaries are already, even if you are CEO or manager, or you have a big company, whatever, you get what you create, what you allow and what you don't allow by your boundaries. So if you have problems in your company, most of the time you can trace it back to because the leader or the CEO didn't set the proper boundaries.
there was a book, it's called Surrounded by Idiots.
Oh, right.
So
Yeah.
I think you know about this, and because it based on an interview, the writer who was having an interview with this entrepreneur, and he was saying, "Oh, I'm surrounded by all these idiots." So he said, "So you're calling these people idiots, but who employed them?" So that's the question. So if you end up shifting the blame, so as you said, just it reminded me in terms of boundaries when you say, and you said healthy boundaries. It's a broad topic, I know. Just give a few examples quickly if you can, like in a work scenario, relationship scenario, friends. Like when you say, "Oh, you're not my best friend anymore because I need you now, you're not listening to me," say for example. But there's a boundary you have set for yourself because I cannot keep on taking all this
Well,
negativity. Yeah.
let's give an example of anger. If somebody is very angry with you, start shouting, etc., right? Throwing verbal abuse or whatever. This is not a boundary. By basically, I don't like what you're saying, and and you still stay with in the situation. It's basically passive, and a boundary basically means I really feel hurt by what you're saying, so you acknowledge the feelings what this is creating, and I don't feel respected by the way you're treating me. So unless you change your behavior, I will now leave the room till you are calmed down, and then we can come back together again.
Yeah.
That is setting a boundary. Because it basically says, it acknowledges how it makes you feel, which is important, and that you need to communicate, because it's not like, well, what the person is doing, it's also the impact that it is having on you, but then also communicate, I don't want this, I don't feel respected, therefore, hence, unless you calm down and change your tone and treat me as I deserve, I will step out until you're ready, and then we can have this conversation. And the reason why I say the last bit is you still are open. It's not like, oh, I shut you out, I don't want to see you again, but I want to do it on a healthy, mature way.
Exactly. But sometimes people feel that, "Oh, you're leaving the room, you're not even listening to me, you're ignoring me."
No, well, but that's why I said, if you just vocalize it, as I said, I don't feel respected, so this is the reason why I'm now leaving. Until you have calmed down, then I can come back to you.
There are also situations when definitely you have tried this, and probably from my personal experience, I can say there's a point the other person is not ready to cooperate. Like you're saying, let's do it this way. It could be in workplace, your friend, relationship, whatever. There's a point that comes that you have to let go.
Yeah.
What's your idea of letting go, and how people can, in situations like that, because there's some kind of guilt that works when you're leaving someone, even though they were toxic to you, but they're good memories, good times. So how people should deal with this idea of letting go?
Okay, so you're talking about the person who wants to let go of a toxic relationship, or the person?
In both ways. One is someone has left you. Because I remember I had a discussion with you when you gave me an example, a person in the special services, or someone who was literally in deployment in military, and he was probably in Afghanistan or Middle East. He dealt with everything, and he came back home, but he found out that his wife was cheating on him, and that totally happened. So that destroyed him. So the guy who was strong enough to deal with everything, but suddenly, so this is the situation, probably the wife, say for example, she has left now, and now he's alone, and how to deal with this idea of, okay, I have to let go of her.
Well, let's use it as an example because it may relate to people. So he's basically trained in special forces, has the mindset how to survive in difficult, extreme, dangerous circumstances, and then came home and then found out that his wife has an affair with his best mate, and then throws him out of the house, which is of course very well damaging because you're talking about betrayal. And a trust issue, very traumatic. But then not only that, he loses his residential area, his security, even his relationship with his children was getting involved. So he had to go to court, all the legalities, whole big trauma. And it was interesting when I had a conversation with him about it. He said, if you had somebody in that time frame, because it was many years ago, who would help you to navigate that transition of trauma, of pain, would you have taken hold of that person? He said, oh yes, but they were not there.
Okay.
So he coped by going to the gym a lot, which I think is a healthy way of, at least a healthy way, but alcohol also got involved, and that's always the biggest one. People using alcohol to soothe their pain. Understandably, but of course that becomes destructive in any other ways. And I have dealt with that. I have also coached people who've gone through betrayal, trauma after an affair, discovery, and how do you recover, and how do you then let go? Yeah. One of the principles I see is fundamental in letting go. Besides the acknowledgement of what is happening. The expression of emotions, the validation, they have to be acknowledged, they have to be embraced. It's also coming to a place, and remember, this is a process. So please be aware, this is not just a 10 minutes thing.
Exactly, yeah.
So what I'm saying now, please.
One size doesn't fit all.
Yeah, put it into context. But I do found there are certain principles that I believe, and I've seen it also in my own life, are fundamental for your healing process. And part of the letting go is choosing to forgive. In order to come to a place of forgiveness, that may take time for different people in different ways. But in my experience and with the people that I have helped, they have seen profound change once they start to go into moving in that arena.
So it's like you're finding your closure, your own closure, even if that person probably haven't given you that opportunity, you are finding it for yourself.
Most scenarios, the person doesn't even care or doesn't even come back, or they don't, they're out of the picture, and they don't know what the harm that they have caused for whatever reason. But that's not your responsibility, you see. Forgiveness is not about getting somebody off the hook. It's basically acknowledging what has happened, but you don't hold on to it anymore. You let it go. You cancel the outstanding debt, so to speak, that they have on you. But it doesn't mean that what they did was okay. It doesn't mean that they are justified. No, that's their burden to carry. Exactly. That's for them to resolve. And that's not an easy thing, because I speak with people with all kinds of trauma. You're talking about sexual trauma, so this can go into very deep levels. But again, it's interesting. I'm personally very drawn also into the power of forgiveness. It's in my power to forgive people, not the other person. It's my power. I am sowing a seed of peace. But if I hold on to my revenge and on my punishment, I basically sow a seed of hate.
And also you keep on punishing yourself.
And yourself, it's a torment. It's a torment. I
exactly.
think not forgiving, and this is, I think, I correlate this with mental health, you see. People don't always make that connection. I'm more and more convinced people who are, for whatever reason, and please hear me, there is a context, there needs validation of emotions and the trauma. I'm not smoothing that over, okay? These are horrible things sometimes. When you hear these stories, it's just heartbreaking. Yet, for emotional healing, and come back to self-leadership, even though hurt has happened to me, I have to take personal responsibility. How do I heal again?
How you are reacting to situation, your response, really, it depends on that. And
yes.
And it's scientifically proven, and this is neuroscientifically as well, because your stress hormone that gets released when you get ready to face a situation, say someone has taunted you, And online, because we were discussing about this idea of cancel culture now. Anything you say nowadays, if someone doesn't like you, straight away they come after you, you're canceled. If you're on Twitter or social media, you care about these things, then definitely you're in trouble. But if you don't, like, say, for example, for myself, to be honest with you, I really don't mind whether I lose subscribers or people start hating me or doing this, because after I do this interview, I'm kind of taking a challenge of going to a live streaming where there are possible or possibilities are that people would not be happy that I'm on that platform. But I feel like even from both sides, people who are hating or people who are being the subject of the hatred, it's important that we send out this message of tolerance, because I see now, especially in this society, I'm not trying to be an advocate or saying that I'm better than other people, but I feel there's a lack of tolerance, which it used to be there always for many years in history. You'll see, due to race, culture, religion, there's all divide and all these wars happening because of this intolerance. But nowadays, it has found a different domain as well. Now, this online domain where things are happening, even someone can do hiding behind their own screen, and they can write a comment and then ruin your day.
There's a lack of accountability, because I think sometimes with all this behind the screen commenting, editing, and posting, whatever, it is in one sense, I think you lack. I have to say this carefully because I know this is being published. But in one sense, I think it's unfair, because now we see each other. I can see your facial expression. You get a vibe of how I feel, how I think. And if you think that you don't understand me, you can immediately ask, what do you mean? And there's an interaction. When you take that out and it's only on text, I don't see that. So you don't hear the tonation of my voice. You don't hear my emotion. You don't see my facial expression. You don't get the vibe. You only see the words, which are very editable, very controlled. And I think part of the problem in you mentioned about cancel culture, but I see it also in other areas, is, to me, if I'm really honest, it drills down to two things. First of all is we don't know really how to listen. And the second bit, we don't know how to have empathy. And there was one book I read, which is basically called Empathy. And the guy who wrote it basically said that we have an empathy deficit growing in our society. And if you don't change it, it just becomes increasingly a big problem. And so he wants to advocate an empathy revolution. So in other words, let's create more empathy. But in order to have empathy, you have to learn to listen. But in order to listen, you have to dial down your own assumptions, your own opinions, your own preconceived ideas. You have to block that all out and really listen to another person, to their story.
Exactly.
And that requires quite some practice, and I think that's why like meditation and reflection is so important, because it helps you to focus on only one thing. And the positive benefit of that is that when you and I are now in a conversation, I'm focusing on you. So I block anything else around me out. Any distortion, any noise, I am not focusing on that. I want to engage with you, and that's why I'm now starting to connect. Now, everyone in society, regardless of your culture, regardless of your background, regardless of your gender, we all have this universal need. We want to be loved. We want to be seen. We want to feel accepted. We want to feel understood. Everyone wants it. And the key to have that is by emotionally connecting with one another, by listening to each other and have empathy. Because you see, once we start to connect and I listen to your story, I empathize with you, think, oh my gosh, that's horrible when you went through that pain or through that trauma. That must be horrendous. The person starts to feel connected. Now, from a scientific point of view, what happens? They call it the bonding hormone. It is not only between intimate partners, it's also between people. The bonding hormone, oxytocin, is being released. It basically makes us feel like, wow, we're connecting.
Everything we do as humans is based on our need for connection and also the fear of rejection.
Yes.
So everything we do, how we react throughout the day, this is what we are driven by.
You see, and and for me, it's a personal story because I have faced rejection a lot. For me, it started in my childhood. I was not wanted when I was born. So you can talk about rejection from a very early age. And then, of course, through life, everyone faces rejection, whether that's through a job, you don't get a job, but also, you know, through betrayal. Betrayal is one of the deepest form of rejection because it's a violation of trust, but it's also a violation of, well, who you are as a person. But I've come to conclude that, again, referring back to forgiveness, it helped me so much more to have empathy and compassion with people. That's my gain from my adversity, so to speak. And I realized more and more, if we say we want to have a tolerant society, but that for me means we need to start to learn better to one another and not try to convince each other or persuade each other of our opinions, because we think that if we have to have love among each other, you have to agree with me. But that's not love.
But say, for example, Marco, in your case, since you brought it up, I'm very intrigued and ask you, because there are many people who have similar story and different experiences probably. So when you have this kind of experience of rejection, and it definitely, it's kind of a trauma as well that stayed with you. It is a trauma.
Yeah.
And when you're growing up, how it affected you, and to a certain extent, how different areas of life you felt that it affected, and then how you overcame. If you could share that, it might be beneficial to other people.
That's a big one, and so I'll try to keep it short. But I think it affected me in my childhood, teenage years, young adulthood for quite a long time.
In what way?
That is a good point. A lack of direction, lack of purpose, not feeling connected with my surroundings, because, you know, it wasn't, I never felt, for example, at home, even though I had a family and I had two older brothers.
So it affected your self-worth, do we say?
Yeah, self-worth. Okay. But you see, these are words that you don't use when you're young, right? So this is language that I now use as I'm grown older and I have learned to identify, etc. And so I feel like imprisoned in those feelings. And I struggled a lot with depression, a loss of purpose, no sense of direction, or always, this is a catchphrase, you know, which I felt always like an airplane. It sounds maybe weird, but like an airplane in the air that had no permission to land. And it sounds that for me I use metaphors quite a lot because they are very helpful, because they can help sometimes unlock our expression in emotions. And what it communicated was, I am here as a person, but because I was not celebrated when I was on Earth, I remained in midair.
Did you feel like you're not grounded, you're not worthy enough, or okay, there are places, say, for example, you say, okay, my opinion doesn't count, or, you know, did it affect like that, say, for example?
It's almost like you're invisible, so you're not seen for who you are. And of course, I had to work through. I don't have a problem now, by the way.
No, definitely.
I know who I am. I'm very grounded, and I accept myself. There was another thing, you know, even though you have not received the acceptance that you should have received as a child, I gained it now through other means, by a healthy other relationships, by healthy, mature people who validated me. Because part of the healing process is also, if you have not got it from the natural environment, you know, I mean, in childhood, you can still receive it. It's a longer journey by other safe people.
But for you, the transition point, how did it happen that suddenly?
For me, yeah, that's a good point. I like the way how you pinpoint it. I think for me, the transition point was really my faith. I had a spiritual encounter, which really basically revolutionized everything. Doesn't mean that everything was then paradise, because it wasn't. But from a spiritual perspective, I got.
Is it religious or spiritual? Sorry to interrupt.
Well, I don't like the word religion for all kinds of reasons. For me, my faith is Jesus. I really believe in Jesus, what he modeled and what he emphasized and how he lived out. But the reason why I don't like religion is because I think he came not to create Christianity. That's what man made. That's what man did, with all the traditions, with all the rules and will stop by man, you name it. And I think that message got so overcrowded, and I think sometimes, if I'm really honest, misused, abused, for political gains, for personal gains. And for me, and I have been on a journey even, a few years ago of detoxing, as I call it. I wanted to go back to what is the core. What's the core message where he stood for? And I've explored other religions in my search, to seek understanding and to seek, progress. But I think the encounter that I had with him was because of his unconditional love. And I'm fully aware that this has been a spiritual experience. And I think what I want to stress is, even from a professional point of view, this is my experience. This is to do with my value system that has been evolved over the years, of course. And I will never impose that on somebody else in a professional context anyway, but also even privately, because everyone has to figure that out for themselves. I want to stress that point. I think what happened was that spiritually something shifted, but I still had to process from a soul level. And what I mean with that is mentally, emotionally, what was happening. And so I still had to change my mindset. I still had to process the grief or the things that have happened, and I had to unlearn things. And seek help in that, which I had, through counseling and therapy later. So you have to see it as a holistic kind of point of view. So even though you can have an inroad in one way that gives you hope, you still have to think about emotionally. Because, for example, emotionally, I didn't know how to express my emotions. Something I've learned over the years, which now I understand from a research point of view, and scientific, how important it is that people learn how to identify, label, express, and validate their emotions. The incapacity that people have, the inability that people have, the more they have that, the more it has an effect on their mental health. And that's something I think is also in our culture not really being, people are more becoming aware now these days, mental health. But I still meet a lot of people who find it very hard to identify their emotions. What are they feeling?
Definitely. I think it creates a sense of uncertainty within yourself, because you can't put a finger on it and you don't know what you're going through. So I'm sure there are many people who are going through the similar experience, but in a different context, because the world is changing so fast these days, and things we have seen before, there will be big change happening every century. Then it started like 20 years, 6 months, and now every week you see some change. And I get to hear things, how things are progressing so fast, how different medium of exchange, transaction, everything is changing. So sometimes I come across people who have been in a profession for 20, 30 years, and suddenly they're saying that either I feel redundant already, even though I'm in my job, or I have been made redundant. So, and they're trying to find a new profession, something that would be more fulfilling. And probably people have this awareness now more after the COVID or the lockdown. During many people, they had the time to think about those things. So I have the question for you. I'll make it a two-part question. Hope you will remember. The first part is, because you mentioned already you had been a designer and or a graphic designer.
Branding. I was involved in branding design. Yes.
Yeah, branding design. So from that point, and you had been successful in your profession, but from that, the transition that you decided to do, that you want to dedicate this part of your life for, I would say, it's services to people. There's definitely some kind of transaction happening, but end of the day, you are doing more, you're improving lives of other people. So there's a big element of services involved, which definitely gives everyone a bigger sense of happiness, which you can explain more. So why this transition? Why have you decided? That's number one. And second one is that people who are struggling to make this pivot or this change or this transition in their life, how would they do that? Because from your experience, probably when you share, some answer would be there already. But that's my two-part question. But you are free to ask me again
No,
if
that's
we
fine.
if we line the chain of thought.
So yeah, I shifted from my branding background to coaching. But in order to put that into context, you have to understand something else as well. And that's with everyone. Everyone has a story and everyone has puzzle pieces. And sometimes those pieces doesn't make any sense. Still, they are aligned later in life and you start to connect the dots. So I will give you kind of a summary, and that will probably help you explain why I do what I do now. So, for example, when I was younger, I wanted to become a pilot for the Air Force, right? And that didn't work out. And then I tried the civil aviation, and that didn't work out. So what next? And then I did, because there was uncertainty about it, I did then, and in the Netherlands, they call it a bit different school system. So I did an educational route for 2 years, I think it was, in business and economics. And there was a lower level than I would go, but I managed to do that and I passed. And basically there was a lot of uncertainty. I just didn't know what to do next, because my aim initially was, I want to become a pilot. And when that dream basically didn't work, what then? And so then I had a whole journey of 3 seasons with unemployment and a lot of temporary jobs from all kinds of bit. I did a lot of stuff. And nothing really either resonated or was long enough, etc. Then I had longer contracts with different things, until I got involved in a job recruiting process that would help me understand what I really wanted, and then take a journey in that. And that was happening because I got fired from a job. Well, not fired. The job contract ended. And therefore earlier than they were anticipated, and that basically means I had to find a new job, but I didn't want to go back in the old job, so I wanted to find something else, and that's why I got involved in a job routing process, which basically is a job coach helping you to discover what you want. And in that process, to cut the story short, I made a choice which basically brought me to England. That is now over 2 decades ago. I was married at that time frame. Things turned out very differently. And then I hit a second crisis. I would describe 2 spiritual events that have been very significant for me. One when I was in my early 20s, late teenage years. Yeah. And this one was when I hit rock bottom, when suddenly my marriage collapsed. My ex left for somebody else. My business went down, not because of me, but just dried up. It was basically, I described it a personal earthquake, because I lost, basically it had a ripple effect on so many levels. Relationships, friends, everything disappeared. And that was really tough. And that brought me to a very dark place, which basically meant that I was suicidal. I wanted to commit suicide. And that's where I had the second, as I call, spiritual awakening, that basically, looking back, has stopped me. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here. That has been very powerful. But again, that was not, everything is paradise that I said earlier. But something spiritually shifted. I still had to face the trauma of betrayal and the loss, and then a divorce that you didn't anticipate it. I didn't want it, but it happened. So I had to grieve. I had to process, come to terms with a new reality. Because I hit rock bottom, I had to start from scratch again. I had post-traumatic stress. Yeah. I was not so familiar with it, but the symptoms that I experienced, not disorder, it was the symptoms of the signals. My mind was in a fog, I couldn't think straight. A lot of pain and disorientation was going on because of the loss of so many levels. But in that process, I started reading a lot of books, because for me, reading was really how to get my mind back in order again. Because you have to remember, if your mind is like a war zone, that's how I can best describe it. I had to bring order back into it, try to make sense. And as I started reading, one of the book was I would call it a catalyst. And the reason why was because something started to get awakened in my heart. Something came alive. Despite all the adversity and the hardship and the pain and the trauma and the disorientation, something got awakened. And I thought, what is this? And so I started exploring that, which was to do with coaching. Which interesting enough is my second encounter with coaching, because that's why I told you earlier the story. I was already in the Netherlands, experienced it with that. And I started to take a risk. I had nothing anyway, so I put it on the credit card. Did my coach training long distance in the United States, accredited, and then also here in the UK for 6 months, residential, and made the shift. But in that process of, of choosing and jumping and taking a risk, and I think this is so important in life, you talked earlier about uncertainty. I have this catchphrase, how to dance on the waves of uncertainty. And that's a skill I think we all need to learn in life, particularly in these days, getting uncomfortable with uncertainty. And I think a lot of people have not learned the skills how to become more resilient when things are not going as we wanted it to go. Part of that process of rediscovering and coming alive, I also read a poem, and this poem is written by millions of people, watched by millions of people, because it's very well known by Lord of the Rings. And the poem is very personal to me, even though it's so well known, because I can still remember when I read the poem for the first time, it was as if those 4 sentences were just burning in my heart. That's how it felt, as if a stamp was being sealed into me, and I started to weep. And I thought, what the heck is going on? Why am I so impacted by these 4 sentences?
I mean, you should share it with the audience as well.
Yeah, I want to share it. Of course I will. From the ashes, a fire shall be woken. A light from the shadow shall spring. Renewed shall be the blade that was broken, and the crownless again shall be king. That to me was the summary of what I've been going through, and it immediately started to capitalize my summary, how I think also want to help other people. The first bit, from the ashes a fire shall be awoken. I was in the ashes. I lost everything. I hit rock bottom, wanted to end my life. I know the mental struggle and the spiritual battle when you face darkness. But in that darkness, I had the light ignition, partly of that my spiritual encounter, which I'm God thankful for, but also the ignition of the catalyst of reading this book, that something came alive. So the passion got awakened. And there is a beautiful verse that says, he will not extinguish the wickering flame. It's like a candle that you want to keep it alive. You want to keep it burning, not that it is sniffed out. And that's how it felt. My life could be sniffed out just in a second, but that didn't happen. So that's the first bit, ignition of passion, something that makes you come alive. The second bit was a light from the shadow shall spring. That speaks about hope. And I've noticed, when hope is awakened, you get a new energy. And I've seen so many people, when hope is gone, people diminish very quickly. You can be the strongest person, but if hope is gone in your life, it can have a huge impact on your mental and your spiritual well-being. And so that element is about how can you inspire people in hope again, despite things that happen to you. How can you find hope and that there's a way out? The third element, the renewed shall be the blade that was broken. Now that to me is very personal, because I really felt like, where's my life going? I felt my purpose is gone. It's broken to pieces. And that phrase basically recommunicated, I have a life of purpose. I have something to live out for, and it will be forged into a weapon, so to speak, a weapon of purpose, sword of purpose, as I call it. And then the crowners will be a king. That speaks about identity. That speaks about who you are. Now that to me immediately makes perfect sense, because you see, if we start to get aligned with our purpose, our values, and our strength and capabilities, something starts to sync, something starts to harmonize. But we also have to know who we are, because I've seen people who know their purpose, but they don't know who they are. They don't know what their identity is. Exactly. Or they know their identity, but they have no purpose. Or, there's this mismatch going on. And I realized in order to build your sort of purpose, whatever that might mean for you, you have to know who you are in your own personhood. And I see so many people who work for their identity, instead of from their identity. It's a big difference. True. Because you see, if you work for your identity, you get hooked up into your role, into your position, in your title, in your status, and take that away. And most of the time, people,
I feel not even your role, your identity. It's more like an identity imposed on you by someone else.
Can also be, that is also, that's a big one. I love stories from movies, because they are, for me, very metaphorically. Can be very powerful. In Deaf Poets Society, for example, there is this guy who discovers that his true passion, Harry Haverdigan, he came alive. He said, "Oh, I really want to do, and I want to become an actor. I want to become a drama." But his father imposed on him the role, "I want you to become," I think it was law or medicine, because he didn't have that kind of opportunity, and he wants his son to do it. And he really forced him to basically go that route. He wanted to quit drama, the acting. And his son was unable to stand up against his father to basically voice that and said, "No, father, I want to do this, because this is really what makes me come alive." He wasn't unable to do that because of internal loyalties. There's sometimes also a loyalty structure going on when, with the child and parents. And he sadly committed suicide. And I can understand that crunch point, that pain point of, I can't be who I really am, because I'm being constrained into a straitjacket of expectations imposed on me, but that's not who I am. And so there's a huge internal conflict. And that can drive people really to extremes.
I think as a coach, you probably experience when people come to you with depression or probably extramarital affairs, midlife crisis, and things like that. Some people who don't commit suicide, probably they go through a different route, like they're still alive, but going through all these different obstacles.
There are many different ways how people cope. People escape then in alcohol, or that can be porn. It can be so many other things, trying to cope, to soothe the pain. And not knowing how to navigate that, or become a work alcoholic. How many times do you hear people say, well, just work hard, and then that is not it's not resolving the inner pain that people are carrying. And there's this, I do believe, when we don't, how you say that, process our internal pain or unresolved pain in our childhood, or even later in life, if you don't process that and we start to suppress it, our body will keep the score. And I think it's true, and that affects also our well-being. And if it affects our well-being, it also affects our relationship dynamic, our interaction, everything.
And so I feel that it happens from a very childhood. I mean, I have been through it being in a society, and I was sharing with you earlier. There's many people I met along the way. It was a common formula. You come from a particular family, and everyone is asking you either to be an engineer, doctor, or a lawyer. So I was a lawyer myself. And then I realized that I'm a creative person. I'm a musician. I want to know about life more rather than just following one path. Many people were unhappy. Thankfully, my parents were not that hooked into this, unlike other parents. But they still were a bit confused. What is he doing? They're a bit scared about me. Why is he changing profession? And many of my family members, they were like, "We thought you're going to be a barrister, and what are you doing?" And many people started taking pity on me, thinking, "Oh, really? You're going to be a musician?" Even though that wasn't my thing. Currently, I'm doing neuroscience. So I'm connecting music, mind, and brain and everything. I'm trying to find a path for people and doing different research. But I feel when people are born, we always, as you see, as a child or when a baby is slowly coming of age, you see that they touch anything, even if it's fire, they don't care.
Yeah,
But
they have to explore. They're exploring.
yeah, they explore. But problem is along the way, by the age of 15, 16, 17, we are asked, okay, so you're gonna choose science or arts or commerce or business, or what are you gonna do? And
Yeah,
then you have to do for your O levels or your GCSEs, and you go, okay, so what do you want to be? Engineer, doctor, or what?
yeah,
So even when you make a choice, you're thinking you're making a choice, but you're already conditioned by your surrounding, your parents,
yeah,
society, everyone, what they're talking about around you.
yeah,
No, okay,
yeah,
I'll be an engineer or I'll be a doctor. You don't
yeah,
even know. You don't know about life enough. And I say that.
yeah,
That's what happened with me. I at some point in my life, I was like, I have tried so many different things, but I'm not enjoying anything. What I want, what do I want?
yes, yeah,
And knowing who you are, to be honest, this platform I created later, thinking that we should discuss about these things. Like
yeah,
you're sharing your own experience and also the help and also kind of your shared experience. And I would say kind of your wisdom because you are experiencing it with other people who are going through the same kind of difficulties in life.
yeah,
So it's a great asset, I feel, and this is why we are trying to knowing who are. And you mentioned knowing who you are quite a few times, and
yeah,
that's the main idea for people to know. But
yeah,
my second question, if I segue into this one, uh, you mentioned something very important. As I was saying, the answer would be in my first question probably. It's like getting comfortable with uncertainty
yeah,
because these people I'm talking about who have been in the profession or any particular profession, they had been around for two decades, 3 decades, and suddenly they feel either they're out of work or they don't know what they're doing because the younger generation who are coming into the workforce, they're even more capable than there because they have more knowledge, the technology and everything around it, and they
yeah.
have to learn the technology then the advanced model of whatever they're doing. So I asked you that what should they do? Where should they start? And how can they console and find some, some kind of consolation for themselves?
Well, there are on multiple. This is multi-layered. So and that of course is personalized because every personal circumstances are different. But navigating uncertainty, I would approach it first of all. Well, how can I become more comfortable with it? And that speaks about emotional resilience. That speaks about how to navigate that with your whole well-being. Learning to express your emotions, because if you don't learn to deal with that either, it just gets more complicated, right? And I've experienced a lot of uncertainty in my life, in my upbringing, in my searching for why am I here? That has been a red thread, interestingly enough,
Mm,
until I had this pivot moment, 7 years ago now, when I hit rock bottom and the crisis. In the crisis, the spark lit.
mm,
And that is but it still faced a lot of uncertainty. How do I support myself? How do I pay the bills? All those practicalities still had to happen, right? But I've noticed one thing, and this is really the key. I think one of the keys, instead of becoming dependent on our external circumstances, how they are, we have to learn how to live from the inside out. I think it's the thermostat, right? There you can change the warmth in the house, right?
that regulates your temperature. Yeah.
Yeah, and the thermometer is
That
an outside
measures.
one. Yeah,
Yeah.
just measure it and reflects
Yeah.
the temperature, what it is, and that's it.
Exactly.
Now, to use that metaphor, a lot of people act like a thermometer. They just reflect the outside temperature. It's cold, it's cold. It's hot, oh, it's hot, right? So it's like an emotional yo-yo.
Mm,
But when you're a thermostat, that basically means, oh, it's outside cold. We make sure that the internal climate is stable. So in
mm,
other words, you start to create an ecosystem within yourself that you learn to keep more calm. I'm not saying perfect, that doesn't exist, but that you quickly start to become at peace again.
mm.
You will not affect your outside world, your inside world. And this is very interesting because when you learn that, you start to create a very different vibe and a very different environment, because you even start to affect the outside world because you have a different climate inside of you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It sounds a bit like a metaphor, but it's the best way I can describe it. So I've had to
No,
learn
it's more like I feel when you change your responses, we discussed about this, the world, the surrounding, the interpretation of your surrounding changes, because
Yes.
it's the same thing, but every human being look at it in different ways,
Yes.
because what your conditioning is, and based on that, you see things differently. How you would see the same room where I'm sitting in,
Yeah.
you would find what the temperature is, what you're feeling like, whether it's too confined, or how you would see it's totally different.
But yeah, but I had to learn to, and I call it, which most people will hopefully be familiar with, I had to develop a growth mindset. So in other words, not what happens to me, but how I respond will determine my outcome. So now I face uncertainty. So I can either see that as a negative, or I can see, okay, what can I learn from this? How can I navigate this and become stronger? You see, and that is very, very key. But when we face uncertainty or things that are very unknown to us, that we have not experienced before, is another way how I can best describe it. We feel triggered, right? We experience something, we feel triggered. What happens on that moment, our huge database of memory files in our brain, right, is going through all the files to pull out the file that has a similar experience, to offer the solution, and then we have peace again. But when it can't find that file, because it doesn't exist, we start to get panicking. That's why anxiety starts to increase, cortisol increases, because our minds get into stress and realize, oh my gosh, I can't find it. That's how one of the ways I've experienced how panic attack starts, because the mind is basically overheated, right? Until I began to realize, well, wait a minute, I just have to create a new blueprint. Instead of looking to a file that doesn't exist, I have to create a new file. So it means I have to change my response. This is not a threat. This is a learning curve. We will find a way. It may be very different than I had been used to, but we will find a way. And I'll give you an example, because sometimes I think, otherwise it sounds like conceptual. One day, and this was in the early days, I was quite heavy, depressed in a way, still low mode because of all the things that were going on. Was lying in my bed, I can still remember that day. And I woke up and I felt the weight of, very heavy.
Yeah.
And I said to myself, I'm not having it. I'm taking a shower. I washed myself. I brushed my teeth. I dressed myself properly, which I think is another thing is really important, and we'll highlight it in a sec. I'll dress myself properly. I go to a certain place. I have a conversation with a person. I get hired and will pay my bill. And that's what I did. I went to a place, had a conversation with a man, or was it? No, it was a woman, and she hired me on the spot, and I could pay my bill. If I had stayed in bed, I can guarantee you I would have remained depressed. But because I said no, and this is another thing, in the Western culture, we have exalted our mind as an idol. Our mind is a servant, not the master. We have to tell the mind what to do. So I had to tell my mind, if I say it a bit nicely, shut up, you have to listen. We're going against the flow of how I feel. I need to create a new blueprint.
Because the mind doesn't have its own mind, so to speak, interestingly, it takes the signals from outside. So if you tell it, this is what I am experiencing, it thinks, oh, this is what it is experiencing, and this is what the world is like,
Yes, but I had to I had to create a new file, so to speak, with a new experience that override the previous one. And this is what I stress. Sometimes when we have experienced pain, in order to have a positive experience, we have to experience it. That means something has to override it that is more powerful. I had a woman, for example, who reached me out from the United States. She reached out for coaching. But the reason why she wanted to work with me was because she had issues with men. I said, well, then you're very brave. I said, yeah, you got recommended, so I want to work with you. I said, okay. And so she started working with me. But the reason why she did that, and I have to say, she really understood it really well. She had trauma to do with men. And that, by the way, that can apply to anything, can be all the way around. But she realized, in order to get my healing, I have to encounter the positive. And that's what she did. And it was a wonderful experience for her.
No, it's an interesting thing you mentioned earlier about what's beyond. And sometimes, because there's a concept, I was reading a book the other day. It was, one thing is like known, you know, something is out there and you have
Yeah.
already, say it's a book, you
Yeah.
know it's out there and you picked it up, you read that, so that's your known. But there is known unknown as well.
Yeah.
You know there's a book, you know the title, you know the cover, but you haven't read it.
Yeah.
Also there's unknown, like you don't even know that book exists, and
Yeah.
someday you just find it probably lying on a park bench or somewhere, and then you
Yes.
find it. So that's the kind of, sometimes when we come out of that ideas that we have, okay, this is what I used to do, this is what I have to do, then problem is, you are probably, it's like a known unknown. You
Yes.
know it exists and I have to go and get that job, say for example.
Yeah.
But if you keep yourself a little flexible and open to ideas, and then you can come across something that's more aligned, but you didn't know that it existed for you.
Yes, exactly. And that is the search that I think people sometimes have to be willing to go on, to try to explore, to have an open mind.
Like you took the risk for yourself, as you said.
I had to risk, and that's part of why I'm an entrepreneur, because entrepreneurs take risk.
Exactly.
If you otherwise don't, and most entrepreneurs will understand this, you live with uncertainty. If you
Mm-hmm.
don't like uncertainty, don't become an entrepreneur, because sometimes you will have great seasons and other times it's a challenge.
Yes.
If you're uncomfortable, if you don't like that and you find it very destabilizing, then it's maybe not your cup of tea. But having said that, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, I still feel that our culture has not equipped overall people well how to deal with uncertainty, the skills of emotional resilience. Partly I think that's to do with how our education system works, how people have been modeled, parented, through the generations. It's nowadays becoming more, recognized. Emotional intelligence is very important. I would stress, for example, spiritual intelligence is very important, because that means the ability to act with wisdom, right? And compassion, and hold your inner peace regardless of your circumstances. That's spiritual intelligence. Wow, that is a powerful one. If you can learn that one, my goodness, you can dance on the waves of uncertainty. And that's what I aim myself for.
But problem is our tendencies, we are so used to just being in comfort, and like we like whatever is comfortable. So say for
Yes.
example, you find sometimes there are places where people always have these weather conditions. Every year they have flood and they get flooded. They
Yeah.
build it up, next year again it gets flooded, but they still don't move from there.
Yeah.
So but the main thing is that it's like the emotionally they get attached and programmed. They're like, okay, this is my place and I'm attached to it and cannot leave that one. So uncertainty again, you don't want to take
Yes.
a risk. And I was mentioning earlier about this Sam Conniff's quote, which I really love. He wrote this book called Be More Pirate. It says that uh, playing it safe will never actually make you safe. So if you try to be safe, you think that you'll be safer, but it will never happen.
Yeah.
Because earlier we had the conversation about my going to the Royal Navy as well. When you said that, Ershad, there are chances that you might die as well.
Yeah.
But
Not to
anything
make
can
you
happen
depressed, by the way.
anytime. No, I'm like, I know about this, but I wanted to do something because how it happened for me during the pandemic, I felt that I'm going to die. Everyone is dying because I lost many of my friends. So I said, if I'm going to
Forgive.
die, yeah, for real. I mean, I really, some very close people. And I was surprised in London. And I felt, okay, I won't be saved. So what I did every day, as you mentioned, that was a very interesting thing. I used to get up at 8 o'clock. I used to get a shower, get dressed, even though I'm not going anywhere. Go to my studio, sit there, work for 8, 9 hours. And I had been the most productive, to be honest, during the pandemic.
Yeah.
But I knew at the same time, it might happen to me anytime, like other people. If they died, who am I? I'll be dying too. So if I have an opportunity to do something for people, probably I get involved with an organization or somewhere where probably I don't know how long it would last. So
Yeah.
I might probably join the forces in terms of helping people do some relief work or things like that. And
Yeah.
that was the impetus behind why I joined the forces. Marco, it's been a really great conversation, and I hope everyone who's watching or will be listening later on, they will be benefited from this, from the wisdom that is shared with everyone today. So we are towards the end of the show, and I was just thinking if there's anything at the end you'd like
Yes.
to add for the audience.
Yes, I have one thing to add, which I hope will help people when they face challenges and crises, etc. How to turn your crisis into growth. There are 4 elements I always say to people is very key. If you leave any of these 4 elements out, it will tend to be not working. The first one I call is the courage to commit time, resources, and energy. It's very crucial that we take the step to do that. The second one is the consistency to apply and get yourself involved in a process for change. The third one is to be coachable. And what I mean with that is have somebody come alongside you, or whether it's a mentor or could be a therapist, a coach, who knows what they're doing, in order to facilitate that process. And then the fourth element is develop a connection with an inner circle of warriors, as I call it, not whiners. That can be, but it needs to be people who are safe.
But when you say warrior, is it with the O or with the A?
The warrior like you.
Okay.
You know, you go to the airport.
Okay.
Good point. No warriors. No. Okay. Yes, exactly. You know, people are fighters.
Yeah.
In a positive way, who are honest, who are safe. And what I mean with safe is people are unbiased. They are for you. They believe in you, but also speaking the truth. Are assertive and are honest about the ups and downs of life. You know, I don't, as I call it, a toxic positivity, because that basically is denying the reality that we live in. But having a few people like that as an inner core circle is very important. So when you have all those 4 C's, as I call them, they basically it has an increased and dramatic increased chance that you can really facilitate your transformational process.
The 4 C's are, if you could repeat.
The four C's, the courage to commit time and resources and energy. The second one is consistency to embrace the process. The third one is being coachable, you know, being available, that somebody guides you in this process, facilitates this process. And the fourth one is connecting to an inner circle of warriors, fighters who believe in you. Not whiners. You don't need people who are basically moaning. You need people who basically are stimulating your growth.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot, Marco. And I had a great time. I got to learn a lot from you too. So I hope to catch up with you soon, and probably, as I'm saying, a part 2 of this conversation. And in the meantime, keep doing what you're doing, and you're doing a great job, and people are getting benefited. And I'm sure after this interview, there will be a lot of other people who will find some answers from this conversation. So on that note, thanks a lot to you again.
Thank you for you too. Thank you for inviting me.